Okay, it is 6:02, and I would like to call our city council work session to order. We have one item on our work session agenda tonight, that is review and discussion of our 2024 legislative priorities with Laura Smith and LGR.
Out of practice. As you mentioned, we'd like to just take an opportunity ahead of when it appears as an action item to at least have an opportunity to give a little bit of input and feedback on the upcoming session's legislative priorities. So as I reviewed those with Stuart and Mallory recently, didn't sort of generate a lot of changes to the programs, and that's what you see incorporated in the red line document that was included in the packet. So this evening, we just really wanted to sort of touch base, see if there were any questions or any other additions, deletions, corrections that you might like to see. And then we would take those and sort of combine those into an action item and a final legislative program to be considered on the December 13th Finance and Admin Committee agenda, and then adopted on December 20th, so we can get those off prior to the start of the legislative session. And I might ask Stuart Little with LGRs here this evening to maybe just give us kind of a brief overview of what I sent out the November update, which includes kind of their preview of what to expect. But Stuart, if you wouldn't mind just kind of talking a little bit about what you think some of the hot button issues for the session of interest to us might be, that'd be great. And anything that you propose.
And I think we got, just for reference, I think we got your memo today, so some of us might not have had the chance to read it yet in terms of context.
Well, thank you, Mayor, council members. There's plenty to talk about even beside that memo. Was asked by Laura just to give a bit of an overview of kind of what we're going into in the 2024 legislative session, which starts on the 8th of January. First and foremost, in the biggest picture, the state has more money than it's ever had. We'll have a $2.5 billion ending balance in the current year, $3.5 billion in 25, fiscal year 25, which continues to generate a tremendous amount of interest in both spending and tax cuts. So we're going to go through a lot of that effort that began kind of last legislative session, and I'll hit some of the highlights, and particularly how that has potential to have some local impact. They're going to focus a lot on property taxes. There have been the sales tax on food issue is phasing out over the course of time. And part of the energy that went into, if you will recall, the dark story theory of appraisals and those kinds of things were kind of set aside by the court's action about 2 years ago, I think. And so now we're getting into the concept of particularly post-COVID housing market, those kinds of things, appraised valuations going up everywhere across the state. And legislators are very sensitive to that. 2024 is an election year for all of them, everybody in the House and the Senate, and there's nothing like some good property tax relief to make its way through the process. So that'll be coming as well. Last legislative session, we spent some time testifying and watching in particular some of the legislation that passed and that failed. I mean, the expansion of the common consumption law passed, fentanyl test strips passed, set aside funding in the budget for entities who wanted to apply for some of the federal relief dollars. If you didn't have enough to have, didn't have your own matching funds, the state has 200 and some odd million set aside for folks to go through the process and apply in that. Also, a couple things that didn't pass, the flat tax that came up last legislative session, it will be back again. There is a number in a flat tax that will pass. So that we're 0.5% off last legislative session and are going to come back and go to that. The issue that was raised of great concern for local governments, the government competition bill, Senate Bill 8, that would have provided private businesses to get property tax reimbursements for if their entities competed with governmental entities. And the concept was, we're doing the same thing, so we should get a tax break. This has been kind of an ongoing issue for 5 or 6 years now. It will be back. It was sent to the governor vetoed it, was not able to override it. It's narrowed down now to childcare, restaurants, and health clubs are the language that's in the bill. So it's limited down to that now, but it's going to have, it will be back again. There were a couple of other things that we testified on, the ban against prohibiting any local control action on, for example, plastic packaging, plastic bags, as well as prohibiting certain kinds of otherwise legal items. So for example, the city of Wichita had a resolution that prohibited the selling of animals, of dogs in one part of in the city. And the folks raised that as an issue and wanted to, and it was, I believe, turned around in Wichita, but it got up to the state level. And we've had this before, some where they wanted to prohibit you all from engaging in any business with anyone, and whether it was firearms or tobacco or any of those kind of things. And it's just all part of that same package. We'll be dealing with those issues again. We'll be dealing with the government competition issue. And the question of taxes or not, we're going to have, the Senate last year passed a constitutional amendment that capped assessed valuation at 4% a year. And that passed the Senate and it'll go over to the House. So a constitutional amendment requires a 2/3 majority in the House and in the Senate, and the governor has no role in it, because what it does is it puts on the ballot the question of, shall we do this? And so it's already passed the Senate. It will be coming up very quickly in the House, along with the flat tax. We're going to have a whole bunch of tax policy in the first 60 days of the session. Joint Tax Committee met this summer, and they're starting to figure out that has a negative impacts on resale values of your home and all those kinds of things. So people, even the people that passed it in the Senate, are starting to say, maybe we don't need to do that, but they're looking at other examples. And one place to look is a Florida example, where I think they have a kind of a floating cap and those kind of things. So that's going to be coming back. Things that are likely not going to happen, Medicaid expansion, medical cannabis, and the LAVTRF fund restoration. Those are places where there's, ample evidence of interest in those issues. But the only one of those I think that may move, and because lots of people are still talking about it, is medical cannabis. Actually, there's conversations in the works about that. We'll have the appraiser constitutional amendment to deal with, or some version of that. The flat tax will come back. It'll be tied to a whole bunch of other things. There is serious conversation and interest in doing something about tier 3 of capers, that for employers, particularly in border areas where we are, and as that is not an appealing competitive retirement plan for in Missouri or people that work in others. I think 80% of the people in Kansas live within an hour of a border state. So you can make those choices. People are talking about what that would mean. The state has the money to pay that off. It would, the way they talked about it in the pensions committee over the summer, was the state cost is about $320 million to transfer everybody that's in tier 3 to tier 2. And then of course there's a local responsibility that would come in transferring those people. The way they've described it is it would be amortized with just your regular payments going out, I think 10 or 15 years in the future to transfer. Though, if we get to that point, there may be some things short of that. So there's going to be a lot to keep an eye on. Lots of tax policy. I think the session's going to go quickly because it is an election year and you can't raise money and you can't campaign while you're in Topeka. So that may have the most impact. So that's what I have for overview. Like, you want to go through the platform? Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions for Stuart before we dive into the platform on information shared? Stuart, I have one question. Do you know, is the league planning to organize any testimony or action around the local impact on the property tax appraisal cap, especially if some people are having buyer's regret on that already?
Well,
Have you heard of any consolidated action or?
I have not anything. Obviously, they're clearly we're engaged. All the governmental entities are engaged in the process. And so I think everybody's interested in watching now what's going to happen with something short of the constitutional amendment or a modified
Okay.
constitutional amendment. And it's going to be, it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. But yeah, we're all watching. I haven't yet to hear anything from either League of Municipalities or KAC about something structured
Okay.
and organized, but it's in everybody's platforms and stuff.
All right, want to jump into the platform?
I don't know if you want to cover.
It doesn't matter to me. It's your discretion.
If you want to do the highlights you had.
Okay.
Your highlights are in yellow. Do you have a color packet?
I do.
Okay.
I
Your
printed
highlights
it.
are in yellow, and then I'll do the ones that we added.
Printed it on color. So in their packet on page 4 is the beginning of the legislative platform, and I'll just note the things in yellow or that Mallory and I suggested to Laura, and added under the tax policy issue, the appraisal question, because as dark theory kind of moves into the background in appraisal, you can see the modification of the language that we put in there. And then obviously our note at the end of that, going on to page 3 about the court's action. We have suggested striking out sales tax on food. And the only reason I would note that is that it's scheduled to be eliminated January 1 of 2025. So if the legislature comes back and they were to throw in, as they're putting together a tax package, and you get some people say, well, I'll vote for it if we eliminate sales tax on food immediately. We're always going to be a quarter behind because Department of Revenue needs at least 3 months to get transitioned into that. And so if it passed before, March 1st and it was in there, it might go into effect on the July 1. But if it's any place after March 1st, it's going to be, into October. So our suggestion is it's being phased out. If it goes away, that's going to be great, but I don't know that it's going to be a crucial part of anybody's, I think the flat tax draws enough attention. On to page 4, we had a suggested language change on nonpartisan elections. It's probably caught me in a moment of being an editor and picky or something, but down at the bottom, we were asked to clarify the language under education and what technically, and for the record, we represent Shawnee Mission School District. And so we put in here the emphasis in special education on the statutory 92%.
Stuart, let me ask you there, because I know you and Mallory and I talked about the sort of anti-voucher position in the school district's
Yes.
platform, which I didn't see here. Do you think there's value in adding that here, or?
That's a policy choice for you all to make as a body. The school district is opposed to the tuition tax credit that exists in and have been opposing the proposal of vouchers that the majority party was trying to get passed last session. And they have been unsuccessful. It's a thin margin. As you know, the House and the Senate have a very thin margin in terms of their ability to override vetoes. And that's why 2024 is very important. But, that's an issue for you all to decide if that fits in there, but it is, I think it's uniformly on, I think, all the Johnson County school district platforms.
Yeah, I do think if we can support the school district on that, that would be good. I think we've been, as a governing body, big proponents of our local public schools. And I know I have been hearing from education advocates on this special education issue, and I think that's going to be a hot topic. I think there's a hearing in January, right, on the special education
Special
piece?
ed will be January 5th, yeah, right before that.
Yeah.
And if to kind of coincide a bit, I might suggest, and I can draft up some language so when you guys see it the next time, but essentially the language that the school district uses to kind of be very broad-minded about this is opposition to the use of public funds for non-public or home schools, because that's kind of rooted in the Constitution actually says that, you can't have a religious sect get state funds, and there's all kinds of court action going on everywhere, but it could be something just as general and brief as that.
Yeah.
Okay. On page 5, under infrastructure, under the federal grants, just kind of a reference to the creation of the build fund with the matching funds that are available to help a variety of folks engaged in that process. Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I did suggest to Laura, some language on that one. I think we've had some frustration with the lack of state outreach on some of that federal funding, and then as well as the electric charging station build out. So just as an umbrella under infrastructure, you know, advocating for increased engagement with municipalities. So like, for example, the language you added, we have a big project coming up where we got $6 million of federal funding, but because we were on the ball and we'd already applied for it, we can't qualify for any of those state matching funds because you have to be applying simultaneously in order to qualify. So we appreciate the action, but you know, sometimes I think the lack of engagement in municipalities means that the exact solutions that the state is coming up with are not what's most workable.
Well, it is a bit of a black box in some
Yeah.
ways, and the legislative, I think it was the Finance Council who has to approve the dispersing of these funds. And I think this kicked in July 1, and it was, I believe, in October or maybe the first week of November that they approved the first 2 grants, because that's to go through them. And there were 2 grants for like $400,000 total out of 210 million that's sitting
Yeah,
there. So.
Probably because the people who have big projects have already
Yeah.
applied for those federal funds and don't qualify for the program that the
Yeah,
state
exactly.
created.
It's all those kinds of circumstances exactly like that. Yeah. The only other suggestion that we had on page 7 was under the reference to legalization of marijuana. All of the statutes refer to it as cannabis, and just if we want to change it and make that match up, that's just our suggestion. I'm happy to stand for any questions. Those are the suggestions we had, and then Laura's added.
Happy to kind of cover those. My changes are in red. And I was telling the mayor today, I thought we had done this last year, and I guess we thought we did it. We'd had some feedback actually from a resident in kind of thinking about sort of our diversity efforts. And she was looking for that to be much more prominently shared at the outset of legislative priorities. So I left some language later in the program, this under government policies and procedures with promotion of equity and equality, but then also just pulled up into our overarching general statement that that's an important piece for us. Then on page 3, I did strike through the sales tax on food in sort of concert with LGR's recommendation to eliminate that section. But then there was some language that I thought was good and appealing in the league's statement of municipal policy related to sales tax and exemptions, basically just saying, leave us alone. So I've added that there, obviously not specific to any tax on any particular thing, but more generally. Then moving on to page 4, also again, borrowing from the statement of municipal policy, we've talked a lot about abandoned and blighted structures. And the mayor did catch, I think in the statement of municipal policy, it says housing, and I think we want to change that to buildings. I think the actual language talks about commercial properties as well. But I think that is something we've had a lot of conversation around, and I think it's important to include in the program this year, along with, I think we took housing and rental inspections out, but it came back in the league statement of municipal policy, and I know that that's an ongoing issue, an area of focus for us, so I added that back in. And I think those were the only changes from a staff perspective that we included, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions, or if there's anything, if you had an opportunity to read through the statement of municipal policy and anything jumped out at you.
Yeah, and just for the benefit of those who might be newer to doing the legislative platforms, typically, you know, we'll sometimes reiterate select things from the league statement if we think it's particularly important or more likely to come up, but we don't usually just repeat all of them. Our general position is that we're generally supportive of the league's platform as well, but yeah, Debbie?
So were you suggesting changing blighted housing to blighted buildings or
Yes.
blighted property?
Either one, maybe properties.
Yeah,
Properties
it's
is
just the
good.
heading, really. The subject of that section is broader than housing, but the league had put housing in the heading for, I don't know why.
Thank you.
Yeah, Trent?
Thanks, Mayor. My question refers to the dark store theory removal. I think that makes sense given what happened, although I did want to ask, perhaps this is more a question for Stuart, if there are any prospects for that to be resuscitated at any level, because I do oppose this, I find it, advantageous for us as a city to oppose the spirit of what that is doing, even though the actual, vehicle in which it was being, adjudicated has since been resolved per se, but
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially that Supreme Court decision put it back in the hands of BOTA, the Board of Tax Appeals. And what we've seen is that our county appraiser has negotiated with BOTA to reach settlements in all of those cases. So it wasn't a win for us overall, but I don't know if you have any additional thoughts about. I mean, we can just kind of continue to monitor that, what other cities are, communicating but yeah, I mean, generally we would oppose anything that would
Yeah.
place sort of artificial or unrealistic caps on assessed and appraised valuation.
and I think our statement above that is in bold captures that pretty, correctly, just talking about what we're against. But I just wanted to highlight that more for, I guess, my own understanding of,
Okay.
dark store. So we don't have to actually do any action in that, but that
Yeah,
was
and
more just a question.
And I think a lot of times we take the sort of the principles of what's in our plan, and then if the legislature does something else funny during session, we can apply like that principle, if dark store did get resuscitated to, submitting opposition testimony and things like that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, Debbie, and then Ben?
On your substance abuse prevention and treatment, is there anything in the legislature right now relative to a recommendation to increase the tax on cigarettes? It's indicating that the city supports the increase, but is there anything in the works right now that's on the end of page 6?
I don't think so. I'm not aware of anything. I think that was just one we've added because we felt pretty strongly about just making a consistent statement about taxing that as much as we possibly could.
Nothing.
Ben?
Yeah, I see both in the league's statement and in ours, we touch on things like local control, energy regulation, energy-oriented building codes. My understanding is that there is a state preemption against any kind of rules or building codes that would discriminate against like natural gas usage or like source of energy. I think that's just sort of an artificial barrier to us achieving our climate goals, and I'd like to push back against that in our infrastructure section. And the only other one that I had was talking to Josh Thede a couple of times about walkability and some of the changing attitudes at the state level about helping out with things like enhanced walkability and bikeability and things like that. I think it would be nice to include a little something about encouraging some state level, play at least to help out with things like, walkability, bikeability, increased transit frequency, and reducing like traffic and car related injury and death and, dangerous intersections, things we struggle with on Metcalf and Shawnee Mission Parkway.
We do have that in the comprehensive transportation plan
Okay.
section. There's a line about vision zero, but Laura, maybe we could just
Okay.
look at an additional sentence about bike ped infrastructure more broadly.
Yeah, I missed that. Thank you.
No problem. It's in a kind of bit of a funny spot.
I know. Yeah, I know there's a tiny little bit of momentum toward
Yeah.
starting to help out with,
Yeah.
complete streets and things in state projects. So if we can keep pushing that, that'd be great.
Yeah, Laura, it's under that comprehensive transportation plan. Anything else? All right. Anything from our online friends?
Yeah, this is Ken Davis. I'm fine with the way things have been going in terms of your discussion. I support all the changes that are being suggested, as well as those that have been pointed out by individual council members. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. All right. No other questions? Any final remarks from Laura or Stuart? Oh, Leah, one more question?
I just wish that there was something a little bit more substantial about affordable housing, and I don't know which way to go with that. But it seems like we talk a lot about it, but there's not a lot of like actual things that we can do to make this happen. And homelessness is really becoming a much bigger issue in Johnson County at large.
I wonder if we could maybe put in language, and this is kind of on the fly, but about those surplus funds, Stuart, that you've been talking about, if we could put in language that we would encourage the state to look at applications that would benefit, the most vulnerable members of our community, like including funding for affordable housing as one example in that category. Would something like that be good?
Yeah, just something a little bit more tangible than,
Well, and as far as Topeka is willing to take any pages from California, they're doing a lot to at the state level to stop municipalities from, dragging their feet on adding new supply of housing. That'd be a great thing to see, but I'm not holding my breath.
I do know there's been more rural programs and funding at the state level kind of on those issues, it seems like, from some of the league conferences I've gone to. So maybe we could tie it into expansion of some of those programs to also benefit small municipalities more broadly, or.
Yeah, 2 years ago, there was the rural housing
Right.
initiative that had tax credits and those kind of things. And then this last session, they changed it to revitalizing housing, changed the wording of it, which is
Mhm.
always how you do to a program like that. But made that available to other places. But I believe that is limited to cities above 60,000.
Yeah, so maybe for small cities as well,
Yeah,
expanding that.
I think that's an interesting thing to contemplate, is having maybe small cities engage in that
Yeah.
to work on that. So maybe we can talk about that later, but yeah, and I think the housing and the homeless issue is probably after tax cuts on everybody's mind, because it is, as you've described, council member, it is much more obvious to everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing some conversations going on about using some of that surplus to maybe not, but the state surplus of the
Yeah.
$2.5 billion to have that potentially be available for local communities
Mhm.
in some kind of, maybe even a matching program or
Yeah.
something.
So maybe you could work on kind of
Yes.
both those pieces, both on what the existing program is and the criteria, and then,
Yes.
just the surplus.
Is that something you
funds.
just theoretically for the session, or do you want something that kind of maybe would fit in here?
No, I think maybe something that we could fit in
Okay.
the platform and entertain at our December meeting on those points, yeah.
Okay. All right.
But then also, keeping an eye on it for
Yeah.
session too, I think we'd be interested for sure.
well, because I think we're unique in the fact that we are a small community in an urban environment. And so we miss out on a lot
Yeah.
of opportunities for these sorts of things because we aren't a small rural town, but we're also not a big urban
Yeah,
town.
so we don't get like community block grants and things like that, the bigger cities get, yeah. Anything else? Good add, Leah? Seeing none, that will conclude our work session. Thank you, everybody.
Don't
Thank
forget
you. Good night.
Holiday lights and festive sights on Friday evening.
Yes. I know, I'm excited.
Rain and